There are events in history so deliberately erased, so carefully hidden beneath the dust of empire, that even speaking their names feels like a transgression. What happened to Christian nuns during the Ottoman conquest of the Balkans is one of those stories. It's a tale not of battlefields or generals, but of sacred women torn from their prayers and thrown into a system designed to break them. This is not sensationalism. This is documented horror, preserved in the margins of monastic records and whispered through generations of survivors. And what you're about to hear will change how you understand religious conquest forever. Picture the Balkans in the 14th century. Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, regions where Christianity had rooted itself deep into the soul of the people. Monasteries dotted the landscape like spiritual fortresses, each one a beacon of faith, learning, and sanctuary. Inside these walls lived women who had devoted their entire existence to God. They had taken vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. They spent their days in prayer, their nights in contemplation. The world outside was kept at arm's length. They were brides of Christ, untouchable in their sacred calling. But empires do not respect sanctuary, and the Ottoman forces sweeping through the Balkans knew exactly what they were doing when they turned their attention to these holy places. The targeting of convents was not accidental. It was strategic. To conquer a people, you must first break their spirit, and nothing breaks a community's spirit faster than the desecration of what they hold most sacred. Ottoman commanders understood this calculus perfectly. As their armies advanced, monasteries became marked targets, not for their wealth, though that was taken too, but for what they represented. These buildings were the cultural backbone of Christian society. Inside them lived the keepers of tradition, the educators of children, the caretakers of the sick. And they were almost entirely defenseless. When Ottoman raiders approached a convent, the nuns inside had no army to protect them. No walls thick enough to hold back professional soldiers, just faith, just prayer, just the desperate hope that their sacred status might shield them. It didn't. The pattern repeated itself across decades, across regions, with a consistency that reveals its deliberate nature. Church doors were smashed open with axes and battering rams. The sound of splintering would echo through stone corridors where only hymns had been heard before. Altars were overturned, icons torn from walls, sacred vessels looted. But the real prize wasn't gold or silver, it was the women themselves. Surviving chronicles describe scenes that defy comprehension. Nuns dragged from chapels mid-prayer, their veils torn away, their hands bound with rough rope. Some were elderly, some barely past childhood. Age offered no protection. Youth made you valuable. Experience made you a symbol to be broken. Either way, you were taken. These were not random raids by rogue soldiers. This was systematic. The Ottoman Empire operated under what historians call the spoils system, a legal framework that rewarded soldiers with a share of conquest plunder. Human beings were included in that calculation. Captives were distributed, registered, taxed, and absorbed into the machinery of empire. For a nun, the moment of capture marked the end of one life and the beginning of something unspeakable. Imagine it. You spent years, perhaps your entire life, within the safety of sacred walls. Your days follow the rhythm of prayers, the seasons marked by feast days and fasts. Your identity is entirely bound to your faith, your community, your vows. And then, in a single afternoon, everything you are is ripped away. Foreign voices shouting commands you cannot understand. Hands grabbing you, rough and uncaring. The smell of smoke as your monastery burns. The faces of your sisters, terrified, crying, being dragged in different directions. Some you'll never see again. Transportation came next. This wasn't a quick march to a nearby garrison. Captured nuns were moved in chains, sometimes for hundreds of miles, alongside other war captives. They walked in columns, exposed to the elements, to the jeers of soldiers, to the reality that they were now property. Records describe these forced marches with chilling efficiency. Numbers, origins, destinations, the bureaucracy of human suffering. In regions like Wallachia and Thessaly, entire monastic communities simply vanished from historical records after Ottoman occupation. Buildings left empty, names scratched from registries, as if they had never existed at all, but they did exist. And what happened to them next reveals something darker than simple conquest. Because the Ottoman system didn't just want to capture these women. It wanted to erase what they had been and reshape them into something else entirely. The journey from nun to slave was not just physical. It was a calculated destruction of identity, faith, and self. And the methods used to achieve this transformation were as brutal as they were systematic. If you think you know how empires treat the conquered, what comes next will force you to reconsider everything. The real nightmare began not with capture, but with what the Ottoman system did to the mind. Physical chains can be broken. But when an empire sets out to destroy your very soul, when it creates machinery designed to strip away everything you believe yourself to be, survival becomes its own form of death. Forced conversion was the empire's most effective weapon. Under Ottoman law, Christians could theoretically exist as dhimmis, second-class subjects who paid crushing taxes in exchange for the right to breathe. But this tolerance was a fiction for women like captured nuns. Their very existence, Christian religious figures made them targets for Islamization campaigns that were less about faith and more about dominance. Imperial edicts flowing from Istanbul authorized, even encouraged, the conversion of female captives. Provincial governors interpreted these orders with enthusiasm, and nuns, already isolated and vulnerable, became test cases for how thoroughly a human being could be remade. The process was designed to break you psychologically before it touched you physically. Imagine being held in isolation, your rosary confiscated, your cross torn from your neck and ground into the dirt in front of you. You're given a new name, one you don't recognize, in a language that sounds like violence. Ottoman officials don't ask if you'll convert, they tell you that you will. They stage ceremonies where you're forced to repeat Arabic phrases you cannot translate, words that feel like betrayal even as they leave your lips. The Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith, becomes a weapon. Speak it under duress and Ottoman law considers you Muslim. Your past doesn't matter. Your vows don't matter. You said the words. You belong to them now. Those who refused face escalating horrors, flogging, starvation in underground cells, psychological torture through isolation and sleep deprivation. Some accounts, preserved in Christian martyrologies, describe even more invasive humiliations, physical violations designed to break the spirit when threats couldn't. The goal wasn't genuine religious conversion, it was erasure. Every nun who could be forced to renounce Christ became proof of Ottoman supremacy, a walking declaration that even God's brides could be conquered. But conversion was only the beginning. For those deemed physically suitable, another fate awaited. The Ottoman harem system wasn't the romantic fantasy portrayed in later European art. It was an institution of control, a place where captured women were absorbed into households as property. Former nuns were particularly prized. Their years of celibacy, their religious discipline, their education, all of it made them valuable commodities in a system that traded in human beings like livestock. The transfer into imperial or provincial harems followed established slave routes. Women were classified, documented, and distributed based on age and appearance. A young nun from a Serbian convent might end up in the harem of a pasha in Anatolia, her entire past reduced to a line in a registry, Christian, compliant, educated. Inside these households, the psychological torture continued in different form. Former nuns were forbidden to pray, to speak of their past, to show any sign of their former identity. They lived under constant surveillance by eunuchs and senior concubines whose loyalty was to the master, not to sisterhood. Any defiance, any whispered prayer, any hidden cross brought immediate punishment. The cruelty wasn't just in what was done to these women, it was in what they were forced to become. Women who had lived their entire lives in sacred celibacy were now placed in intimate proximity to powerful men. The violation wasn't just physical, it was theological, psychological, existential. And for those who didn't end up in harems, the slave markets waited. Cities like Constantinople and Bursa hosted state-sanctioned human auctions, complete with inspectors, registries, and tax collectors. Captured nuns were stripped, examined, and priced like livestock. Their religious past, once their identity, now became a selling point. Virgin, educated, obedient, the slavers would advertise. Buyers included military officers, merchants, and provincial elites. Ottoman law gave masters near-out authority over their female slaves. Punishments for defiance ranged from beating to sale to even harsher owners. The system was designed to break you into compliance, to make survival dependent on surrender. Standing in those markets, exposed and degraded before jeering crowds, a captured nun faced the final destruction of her former self. Everything she had been, everything she had believed herself to be, reduced to a price negotiated in a language she didn't speak. Some women survived by finding ways to secretly maintain their faith. Hidden prayers whispered in the night, crosses fashioned from scraps and hidden in hymns. Small acts of defiance that kept their souls alive even as their bodies were enslaved. Others broke entirely, their former identities swallowed by the roles forced upon them. The Ottoman Empire's treatment of captured nuns reveals something essential about how empires function. This wasn't random violence. It was systematic cultural annihilation dressed in administrative efficiency. By targeting religious women, the Ottomans struck at the spiritual heart of Christian communities. By forcing conversion, they claimed divine validation. By enslaving and distributing these women, they demonstrated that nothing was sacred, nothing was untouchable, nothing lay beyond the empire's reach. Today, the ruins of burned convents still stand in the Balkans. Names have been forgotten, records deliberately destroyed or buried in archives, but the legacy remains, written in the generational trauma of communities that watched their spiritual protectors torn away and erased. This wasn't just history, it was a deliberate policy of cultural destruction, executed with bureaucratic precision and justified through religious supremacy.